Welcome back, seekers of wisdom, to day 28 of our 30-day Wisdom Quest Challenge. We are nearing the end of our journey together, a journey that has taken us through the highest peaks of philosophical thought and the deepest valleys of self-reflection. We have gathered maps, forged compasses, and learned the ancient arts of the soul. We have learned that the journey of wisdom is a lifelong pursuit, an endless mountain range to be explored. But a wise traveler knows that the journey is not just a relentless march forward. A true quest is a rhythm of walking and resting, of acting and reflecting. Before we can wisely choose our next path, before we can set our sights on the next distant peak, we must first pause and honor the journey we have already made. Today is such a day. It is a day set aside not for new learning, but for deep integration. Imagine a ship's captain who has just navigated a treacherous ocean. Before setting sail again into unknown waters, they do not immediately hoist the sails. They retreat to their cabin, unroll the great sea charts, and review the ship's logbook. They trace the path they took, noting the storms they weathered, the safe harbors they found, the unexpected currents they navigated, the mistakes they made, and the lessons they learned. They do this not to relive the past, but to distill its lessons, to understand the journey not just as a series of events, but as a source of profound, practical wisdom that will inform every decision they make on the next voyage. Today, we open our own logbooks. We are embarking on a day of review and reflection. What have you discovered? This is a dedicated, sacred time to look back on our journey, to process our insights, and to acknowledge our growth. We will tell a story about a mapmaker, long after he thought his quest was over, was summoned to read the map of his own transformation. Our story begins where another left off. We return to Arion, a mapmaker from the city of perpetual fog. Years have passed since he first forged his sunstone, his personal compass of values, and walked out of the gray mists of his home city into the breathtaking clarity of the clear mountains. He has lived a life of purpose and alignment. He established a small school at the foot of the mountains, a place of refuge and learning for others who found their way out of the fog. He taught them the basics of self-discovery, the importance of values, the art of forging their own compass. He lived with integrity and authenticity, and he felt a deep and quiet contentment. He believed, in many ways, that his great work was done. He had completed the journey. One morning, as he was sketching a map of the mountain range for a new student, a scroll appeared on his desk, materializing from the morning light. It was sealed with the ancient crest of the great archive, the labyrinthine library where he had first forged his compass. The message was short and cryptic, written in the same wise, genderless script he remembered from the trials. It read, "A map is not finished until it has been read. The journey is not complete until it has been understood. The archive summons you for your review." A tremor of unease and curiosity went through Arion. He had not returned to the foggy city in years. He had put that life behind him. What more could the archive have to teach him? He had already found his clarity. Yet he knew this was a summons he could not ignore. The process of self-assessment, he was beginning to understand, was not a one-time event, but a necessary and recurring part of a life of continuous learning. He journeyed back down the mountain, a strange feeling of nostalgia and apprehension in his heart. As he entered the familiar gray outskirts of the city of perpetual fog, he found the entrance to the great archive waiting for him, its great stone doors standing open. He stepped inside, and the doors boomed shut, plunging him once again into a familiar, resonant silence. But the interior was not as he remembered it. The long, dark hallway had transformed. It was now a vast, winding gallery lit by a soft inner light. It was called the Hall of Echoing Footsteps. As Arion took his first step onto the polished floor, the space around him shimmered, and a scene from his past materialized. It was him, years ago, feeling the profound despair of his purposeless life as a copier of useless maps. He felt the old weight of that dissatisfaction, the deep suffering of his misalignment. The ancient voice of the archive echoed around him, not with a question, but with a gentle prompt. "Reflect," it whispered. "Review this moment. What was the lesson?" Orion, standing within the memory, looked at his younger self with compassion. "The lesson," he said aloud, his voice clear in the great hall, "was that dissatisfaction is a sacred signal. It is a compass needle spinning wildly, telling you that you are not walking your true path. The pain of misalignment leads to dissatisfaction, and that dissatisfaction is not a curse, but a call to begin the quest for your values." As he spoke the insight, the scene dissolved, and the path before him glowed a little brighter. He took another step, and a new scene formed. He was back in the chamber of righteous indignation, reliving a memory of a childhood injustice. He felt the hot flush of his old anger. "Reflect," the voice prompted. "What was discovered here?" "I discovered that my anger was a guardian," Arion said. "It was guarding my value of justice. My pain was a teacher, revealing to me what I held most sacred." The scene faded. He walked on. The Hall of Echoes guided him through a summary of his entire journey, which was also a summary of the journey we have all taken together in this wisdom quest. A misty fog filled the hall, and he had to navigate it. But this time, he held his sunstone, his compass of values, and walked with confidence, remembering the lesson of day 23, that integrity and alignment are what clear the fog. An image of a great raging river appeared before him, the story of the monk Jiro. He was asked, "What is the difference between acceptance and resignation?" Orion, remembering his own struggle, answered, "Resignation is to let the river drown you. Acceptance is to trust its current and learn to float." An image of a shattered glass tree, mended with gold, appeared. "What is the nature of resilience?" a voice asked. Orion touched the beautiful, flawed image. "It is the understanding that we are made stronger and more beautiful, not by avoiding the cracks, but by healing them with love and awareness. It is the art of turning adversity into opportunity." One by one, the hall presented him with echoes of the wisdom he had gathered. He reviewed the lessons of stoicism, of non-reaction, of self-discipline, of generosity, of overcoming his limiting beliefs. Each memory was a chance not just to recall the knowledge, but to feel its truth in his bones, to solidify its integration into his very being. This journey through the Hall of Echoes was a profound act of review, a way of gathering all the threads of his growth. After what felt like days of walking through his own past, he reached the end of the hall. It opened into the same central circular chamber where he had forged his compass years ago. But this time, in the center of the room, on a simple stone pedestal, there was a single, large, beautiful, and completely empty book. Its cover was bound in a material that seemed to be made of fog and light, and its pages were as blank as the freshly wiped sand on a beach. Beside it lay a single, simple quill pen. This was the final stage of his review, the act of personal reflection made manifest. This was his invitation to journaling. The voice of the archive filled the chamber, softer now, more intimate. "You have walked through the memories of your journey. You have reviewed the lessons. Now you must distill the wisdom. Now begins the true self-assessment. We will now provide you with the prompts for reflection. Answer them with the truth of your own heart." Arion opened the great book. As he picked up the quill, the voice began to speak, and the prompts appeared as faint, glowing letters on the first blank page. "First," the voice resonated, "look back at the man who first entered this archive, the lost mapmaker at the beginning of his quest. In what ways are you no longer him? What has been the most significant aspect of your growth? Second, what was the greatest, most difficult challenge you faced on your journey? Not the external obstacle, but the internal one. What was your deepest fear or most stubborn resistance, and how did you meet it? Third, what was your most important personal breakthrough? What single insight shifted your perception of yourself or the world most profoundly? Fourth, which of the lessons you have learned has been the easiest to integrate into your daily life? And which remains the most difficult? In what areas is there still a gap between knowing and doing? And finally, the voice concluded, having reviewed this entire journey, what is the single most important truth you have discovered? What is the core wisdom you will carry forward from this day? Arion stood before the open book for a long time, the quill in his hand. This was more demanding than any of the trials he had faced before. It required him to be not just a hero in a story, but the conscious author of its meaning. He took a deep breath, and he began to write. What follows is a portion of what he wrote, a long and detailed entry in the Book of Insights. I am no longer the man who first entered this place, he began, the quill scratching quietly in the silent chamber. That man was a ghost, a drifter in a fog of his own making. He defined himself by his craft, but he had no purpose. He was a mapmaker who was profoundly lost. The greatest change is that I no longer look for the map outside of myself. I have learned that I am the map and the territory. My growth has not been in finding a new destination, but in learning to navigate from a new place within myself. My greatest challenge was not the fog, but my belief that the fog was an external enemy. My true struggle was against my own sense of powerlessness. I resisted my own dissatisfaction. I resisted the call to a more difficult path because I was terrified of being truly responsible for my own life. I believed that clarity was something one finds, a treasure one stumbles upon. My breakthrough, the most important insight of my entire life, was the realization that clarity is not found, but created. It is the natural consequence of living a life of alignment with one's deepest values. It is the sun that burns away the fog. He wrote for hours, filling page after page with his honest self-assessment. He wrote about his continued struggle with impatience, his difficulty in fully embracing the lessons of service, and generosity, acknowledging the areas where he still had so much continuous learning to do. He wrote about his breakthroughs in overcoming his old limiting beliefs and the joy he discovered in making value-driven decisions. It was the most honest he had ever been with himself. The act of journaling was not just a record of his journey. It was the final, crucial step of its integration. As he wrote the final word of his reflection, a strange and beautiful thing happened. The ink on the pages began to glow with a soft, golden light. The words lifted from the pages, transforming into a swirling constellation of light in the air before him. The constellation then flowed, like a river of stars, into the sunstone compass that he carried at his belt. The compass, which had always had a gentle, warm glow, now pulsed with a brilliant, steady, and confident light. His active reflection had not just been a review of the past. It had empowered his guide for the future. As the light settled, he looked down at the now blank pages of the book. His story was written. His review was complete. The voice of the archive spoke one last time. You have honored the past. You have integrated its wisdom. The journey continues. Now you must set your intentions for continued practice. Look at your compass. See the direction its brighter light now shows you. Choose the next path you wish to explore. Arion looked at his compass. The needle of light was pointing toward a new, unfamiliar direction, one that corresponded to a value he had identified, but had not yet fully explored. The value of teaching, he understood. His next journey was not about his own clarity, but about helping others find theirs. He spoke his intention aloud into the silent chamber. My intention is to practice the art of guidance, to learn how to help others forge their own compasses, just as I was helped. As he spoke the words, the great stone doors of the archive swung open. He walked out, not into the foggy city he had entered, but onto the sun-drenched path leading back to the clear mountains. The path before him was illuminated by the bright, steady light of his own clarified purpose. The resolution of Arion's story is a profound lesson for us all. The journey of wisdom is a spiral, not a straight line. It constantly circles back on itself, inviting us to review and re-examine our lives from a new, higher vantage point. The act of conscious reflection is not a passive look at the past, but an active engagement that transforms our past experiences into the fuel for our future growth. Arion stepped through the open doors of the archive, the echo of his footsteps still reverberating through the marble chamber behind him like the soft toll of a distant bell. The air shifted around him, not just in temperature, but in texture. What lay ahead was no longer the city of fog he had once known, no longer the narrow, grayscale corridors of confusion that had shaped his early life. The moment he crossed the threshold, he found himself standing on a high ridge, surrounded by sky. Endless, open sky. The vastness before him felt like a silence made visible deep, ancient, alive. The air was sharp and clean, carrying no heaviness, no residue of the fog that had once clung to his lungs and thoughts alike. Below, the city of perpetual fog stretched far in the distant small now, nearly abstract, like an old memory you can't quite recall the details of. It was ghost-like in the pale blue morning, wrapped in a veil that no longer had power over him. The winding road that had once seemed endless and punishing now appeared delicate as silver thread weaving through a vast, living tapestry of forests, hills, and winding rivers. It was all part of something greater now. From this height, he could finally see how each detour, each stumble, each period of stillness and disorientation had been part of the whole. Not obstacles to avoid, but brushstrokes in the masterpiece of his becoming. And in that moment, Arion understood a truth that could only be grasped in hindsight. Every struggle he had faced was not a detour, but part of the map. Even the times he had faltered, even the seasons when he had doubted his compass, turned back, or stood paralyzed by uncertainty, those, too, had meaning. Those were not failures of the journey. They were the journey. The act of reflection had not merely cast light on his past, it had transfigured it. He could now look back, not with shame, but with reverence. Not with regret, but with wisdom. He was no longer simply someone who had survived the road. He was no longer just a traveler. He had become the author of the journey, the mapmaker of his own soul. And now, for the first time in his life, he saw the terrain ahead not with fear or hesitation, but with reverent anticipation. The road of intention. With the sunstone compass at his side and the journal pages still glowing in the quiet chambers of his memory, Arion took his first step forward, not into certainty, but into possibility. The path ahead was not carved into stone. It shifted with the light, danced with the wind. It was not rigid, it was alive. It responded not to maps, but to intention. And so he walked not because he knew exactly where he was going, but because he knew who he had become. This phase of the journey was no longer about seeking truth, it was about living it. No longer about collecting wisdom, it was about embodying it. No longer about looking outward for direction, but about listening inward, letting each step be guided by the compass within. His intention to teach was no longer a mission. It was a mirror, a way of showing up in the world, a quiet offering. It would not manifest in sermons or commands, but in the shape of his silence, in the steadiness of his presence, in how he listened without interruption, in how he gave space for others to hear themselves. He would not impose clarity. He would help uncover it. He would not give directions. He would offer mirrors. And as he walked, a new understanding began to unfurl inside his chest-gentle, radiant whole. The teacher is not the one who knows the most. The teacher is the one who remembers what it felt like to be lost and chooses to stay near the edge so they can greet those just arriving. The torch of reflection. Meanwhile, far behind him, the archive stood quiet once again. Its doors slowly closed, but its halls remained lit not with torches or lanterns, but with the imprints of reflection. like glowing fossils pressed into time. And far beyond that sacred hall, across villages, mountains, and starlit paths, others were beginning their own day 28. Some had just arrived at the Hall of Echoes, breath shallow, hearts trembling, standing before the weight of memories they had long locked away. Others were still walking in fog, unaware that a compass was already forming in the silence of their inner being. Some resisted the invitation altogether, afraid of what they might find if they slowed down enough to listen. But for those who dared, who looked back tenderly, without judgment, with just enough courage to name what had once gone unnamed, a soft and holy transformation had already begun. Reflection is not just a pause. It is a torch, one that burns quietly, one that cannot be mass-produced, one that must be tended by hand, passed from life to life like sacred fire. You, dear seeker, now hold that torch. Let the light settle. After deep reflection, the pull to move forward is strong. The temptation to act, to fix, to use what you've learned, it rushes in like wind after a long stillness. But there is a sacred wisdom in letting things settle. Let your truth settle like snow on a quiet mountainside after a long storm. Let your realizations spread like roots beneath the surface, unseen but anchoring. Let your nervous system absorb what your intellect has only just begun to grasp. Transformation is not a spark. It is a slow unfolding, a fermentation, a ripening. What is true will return again and again, not because you chase it, but because it now lives in you. So pause. Let the light you carry acclimate to your body. Let your cells rearrange themselves around the truths you have remembered. Let the echo of your own insight settle deep enough to become instinct. The invitation to recommit. And so we close this day, not with a grand conclusion, not with a summary or final lesson, but with a sacred invitation to recommit to the path, not to walk it perfectly, but to walk it honestly. To remember that even now, after 28 days of movement, of truth-telling, of shadow work, and illumination, there are still layers within you, still unopened doors, still songs you have not yet remembered how to sing. That's not a flaw. That's the beauty of the spiral. Your compass will grow brighter with every aligned step. Your wisdom will deepen with every act of silence, every kindness that costs you nothing, every pause in which you choose presence over performance. And when you inevitably forget, when the fog returns, as it always does, you will know what to do. You will not panic. You will not retreat into old armor. You will return to your compass, to your breath, to your values, to the journal on your nightstand, to the version of you who once said, "Yes, I will begin," and you will begin again. So write your truths. Let them live not just on the page, but in how you wake tomorrow, in how you speak to the stranger at the store, in how you forgive someone who may never know you did. Then close the journal with quiet ceremony. Look at your compass not for direction, but for alignment. And when the next invitation arises, whether it calls you to speak, to lead, to rest, to love, to protect, to create, or simply to be still, you will know the answer. Because it will not come from fear, it will come from within. You will walk forward not as a seeker who is lost, but as a soul who is remembered. We will meet again soon for day 29, the penultimate step in this shared unfolding. But for now, let stillness be your practice. Let reflection be your prayer. Let the light you reclaim tonight be carried forward, not like a trophy, but like a candle cupped gently between your hands. And as you walk into the quiet of your own life again, may you know that you do not walk alone. May you know that you have been changed. And may you trust that this too is only the beginning.